Have you ever felt like you're just going through the motions during Holy Week, perhaps attending services or acknowledging the season, but missing something deeper that could genuinely transform your life? Many people experience this disconnect, following traditions without experiencing the profound impact these ancient events could have on their modern lives. Whether you've celebrated Holy Week for decades or are simply curious about its significance, this feeling of missing something essential is remarkably common. What if Holy Week could become more than just historical commemoration or religious observance? What if it contained revelations, insights with the power to shift your entire perspective on life's challenges, relationships, and purpose? Throughout this message, we'll explore 7 extraordinary revelations that emerge from the Holy Week narrative when viewed through the lens of the Holy Spirit's activity. These insights transcend religious tradition, speaking to universal human experiences of struggle, hope, and transformation. And as a special bonus, you'll also discover 2 additional powerful insights that complement and deepen these 7 core revelations. The value of what we're about to discover together is not merely religious or intellectual, but deeply practical. These revelations address the core human longings we all share: the need for purpose beyond routine, connection beyond superficiality, hope beyond circumstances, and transformation beyond self-improvement. Whether you identify as a spiritual seeker, a committed believer, or someone simply open to wisdom from diverse sources, these principles have the potential to open new dimensions of understanding that apply to everyday challenges. Each revelation we'll explore illuminates a different aspect of life's journey, from dealing with expectations and disappointments to finding meaning in suffering and discovering purpose beyond success. These insights have transformed countless lives across cultures and centuries, not because they offer easy answers, but because they provide profound perspective shifts that make sense of our deepest human experiences. I invite you to approach this journey with an open mind and heart. You don't need to share any particular belief system to benefit from these revelations. They speak to universal human experiences while offering perspectives you might not have considered before. As we begin, take a moment to identify one area of your life where you feel stuck, confused, or in need of fresh perspective. This simple act of reflection creates receptivity for insights that might speak directly to your current circumstances, wherever you may be on your personal journey. Number 1. The revelation of divine timing, finding peace in life's seasons. Have you ever found yourself frustrated by the pace of your life, feeling that opportunities are arriving too slowly or that challenges are lasting too long? Palm Sunday reveals the first transformative insight from Holy Week, the principle of divine timing that can fundamentally change how we navigate life's seasons and transitions. When Jesus entered Jerusalem, he did so at a precisely timed moment that fulfilled prophecies written centuries earlier. The Gospel of Mark describes how Jesus sent disciples to find a colt that had never been ridden exactly where he said it would be. Mark 11:1-6. This carefully orchestrated entrance reveals something profound about timing that applies to everyone, regardless of their spiritual background. There exists a wisdom in the unfolding of events that often exceeds our limited perspective. In ancient Greek, 2 distinct words describe time: chronos, sequential measured time, and kairos, the right or opportune moment. Most of us live primarily by chronos, watching clocks, following schedules, and measuring progress in linear fashion. Yet the Palm Sunday narrative points to the reality of kairos, moments of opportunity and significance that don't always align with our preferred timetables, but arrive with a wisdom that often becomes clear only in retrospect. Modern psychology affirms the emotional and mental toll of living at odds with life's natural timing. Research shows that resistance to current reality, Fighting against what is, rather than working with it, significantly increases stress hormones while reducing cognitive function and emotional resilience. The brain literally functions better when we align with reality as it unfolds, rather than battling against it. This science confirms what many wisdom traditions have long taught. There is a profound difference between passive resignation and active acceptance of life's timing. Sarah, a healthcare executive, discovered this principle during a career setback that initially seemed devastating. "I had my entire professional path planned out with specific timelines for each promotion," she explains. "When I was passed over for a key position, I was furious at what felt like a disruption to my perfect plan. 6 months later, that department underwent massive layoffs, while I was offered an unexpected opportunity in an emerging field that better matched my values and strengths. What initially felt like horrible timing revealed itself as protection and redirection. This experience fundamentally changed how I view delays and disappointments. What many find transformative about this revelation is how it reframes our relationship with waiting and timing in every area of life. Consider how many of our frustrations, anxieties, and conflicts stem from battling against the timing of situations, whether in career advancement, relationship development, health challenges, or personal growth. The Palm Sunday narrative suggests that timing itself may contain wisdom beyond our immediate understanding. This perspective doesn't demand religious faith, but invites a humbler relationship with time itself. It suggests questions worth considering. What if the timing you're fighting against contains protection you can't yet see? What if the delay that frustrates you is actually preparation for something beyond your current vision? What if life's pace, while not matching your preferences, is aligned with your actual needs and highest good? The Palm Sunday timing revelation appears throughout human wisdom traditions. The Tao Te Ching observes that nature never rushes, yet everything is accomplished. Indigenous cultures worldwide emphasize aligning with natural seasons and cycles rather than imposing artificial timelines. Modern mindfulness practices focus on fully inhabiting the present moment rather than living in regret about the past or anxiety about the future. These diverse approaches point to a consistent human discovery. There is wisdom in learning to honor timing beyond our control. I invite you to reflect on one situation in your life where you're currently fighting against timing. Perhaps a delayed opportunity, a relationship that's developing more slowly than you'd prefer, or a challenge that's lasting longer than expected. Rather than continuing the exhausting battle against what is, experiment with this question. What might this timing be making possible that a different timeline could not? This simple perspective shift often reveals unexpected insights. For those facing particularly difficult waiting periods, consider creating a small daily ritual, acknowledging both the challenge of waiting and the possibility of hidden purpose within it. This might be as simple as a few moments of reflection each morning, writing in a journal, or sharing your experience with a trusted friend. These practices don't change the external situation, but often transform our relationship with it, creating capacity to discover meaning and possibility within circumstances we cannot control. The revelation of divine timing doesn't eliminate the difficulty of waiting or the pain of delay, but it offers a more spacious perspective that reduces anxiety and creates capacity for wisdom that reactive frustration often prevents. Whether viewed through a lens of faith or simply as a pragmatic approach to reality, this shift in how we relate to timing can transform experiences of waiting from meaningless delay to purposeful unfolding. The first revelation that continues to transform lives when embraced with an open mind and heart. If this perspective resonates with something you're currently experiencing, I invite you to share a simple in the comments. This small acknowledgement can remind you of your intention to approach timing differently while connecting you with others exploring the same insight. Number 2, the revelation of holy disruption, finding purpose in life's upheavals. Have you ever had your comfortable routines completely upended, leaving you disoriented and questioning everything? The Monday of Holy Week provides our second revelation as Jesus entered the temple courts and overturned the tables of the money changers. A deliberate disruption of religious business as usual that speaks directly to how we might understand the upheavals in our own lives. The Gospel of Mark describes this provocative scene. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. Mark 11:15-16. This deliberate disruption reveals something profound. Sometimes systems, patterns, and routines that appear normal and necessary actually require disruption for renewed purpose and authenticity to emerge. What's particularly striking about this temple clearing moment is that the activities Jesus disrupted weren't obviously corrupt or malicious. Money changing provided necessary currency exchange for temple offerings, and selling sacrificial animals served those traveling from distant locations. These were practical services that had gradually displaced the temple's core purpose. Similarly, many patterns in our lives aren't inherently wrong, but can incrementally displace more essential priorities until disruption becomes necessary for restoration. Research in systems theory demonstrates how all human systems, from organizations to families to individual habit patterns, naturally drift toward comfort and efficiency rather than purpose and effectiveness. Without periodic disruption and reassessment, even the best designed systems eventually serve their own maintenance rather than their original mission. This research helps explain why meaningful transformation often requires disruptive moments that force re-evaluation of established patterns and assumptions. Michael, an artist and teacher, experienced this principle through a health crisis that upended his productivity-focused lifestyle. "I had built my identity around constant achievement and output," he explains. "When an autoimmune condition suddenly left me unable to maintain that pace, I was devastated. Everything I thought defined me was disrupted. In that forced pause, I began recognizing how my productivity obsession had actually displaced my deeper values of connection, presence, and meaning. What initially felt like devastating interruption eventually revealed itself as necessary intervention that restored priorities I couldn't recognize until my normal patterns were disrupted." This perspective on disruption offers a powerful reframing for everyone, regardless of spiritual background. It suggests that periods of upheaval, whether chosen or unchosen, might serve purposes beyond our immediate understanding. Rather than merely surviving disruption until we can restore previous patterns, we might approach it with different questions. What has this disruption made visible that was obscured during normal operations? What priorities or purposes might be trying to resurface that had been displaced by familiar routines? The temple disruption specifically targeted activities occupying space meant for another purpose. The Court of the Gentiles, the only temple area accessible to non-Jews seeking connection with God, had become so filled with religious commerce that its welcoming function was compromised. This pattern appears in many life contexts: career demands that displace family connection, administrative tasks that overtake creative purpose, or maintenance activities that leave no space for innovation and growth. Disruption often reveals these displaced priorities, creating painful but necessary awareness of what has been lost. Multiple wisdom traditions recognize this paradoxical function of disruption. Zen Buddhism values the concept of beginner's mind, returning to seeing without preconceptions that develop through routine. Indigenous rite of passage ceremonies intentionally create disruption to facilitate transformation from one life stage to another. Modern psychology recognizes that significant personal growth often emerges not from continuous comfort, but from successfully navigating discontinuity and challenge. I invite you to consider one recent or current disruption in your life. Perhaps a relationship change, career transition, health challenge, or unexpected circumstance that has disoriented familiar patterns. Rather than focusing exclusively on restoring previous stability, reflect on these questions. What might this disruption be clearing space for? What had gradually filled the temple courts of your life, displacing more essential purposes? What becomes possible in this disruptive space that continuous routine would have prevented? For those experiencing particularly difficult upheavals, consider creating a simple reflective practice to distinguish between the pain of disruption itself and the suffering that comes from resistant interpretation of it. This might involve writing down both your experience, "my job ended," and your interpretations of it. "This means I'm a failure," or "this means opportunity for redirection." This separation often creates space to hold the reality of disruption while remaining open to its potential purposes beyond our initial understanding. The revelation of holy disruption doesn't minimize the genuine pain of upheaval, but it offers a more expansive interpretation that can transform how we experience life's inevitable discontinuities. Rather than merely surviving disruption until normalcy returns, we might approach it as potential restoration of displaced priorities and purposes, a perspective that doesn't require specific religious beliefs, but offers wisdom applicable to universal human experience of discontinuity and change. Number 3, the revelation of questioned authority, finding truth beyond easy answers. Have you noticed how hungry our culture is for simple, definitive answers to complex questions? The Tuesday of Holy Week offers our third revelation as religious leaders repeatedly challenge Jesus with trap questions designed to either discredit him or force him into simplistic answers. His masterful responses reveal something profound about navigating a world where truth often transcends the false dichotomies we're pressured to accept. In Matthew's Gospel, 3 groups approach Jesus with cleverly constructed questions. The Pharisees ask about paying taxes to Caesar, the Sadducees present a puzzle about marriage in the resurrection, and an expert in the law tests him about the greatest commandment, Matthew 22:15-40. Each question attempted to force Jesus into a binary answer that would either alienate followers or contradict Scripture. His responses consistently transcended these false either-or frameworks, revealing deeper principles that address the heart of each issue while refusing the artificial limitations of the questions themselves. When asked if it was right to pay imperial taxes, Jesus didn't choose between the presented options of Roman loyalty or Jewish resistance. Instead, he shifted the conversation to a more fundamental principle: give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. Matthew 22:21. This response transcended the political trap while inviting deeper reflection on what truly belongs to God versus temporal authorities, a nuanced perspective that neither side of the debate had considered. Contemporary research in cognitive psychology identifies dichotomous thinking, seeing issues in absolute either-or terms as a significant barrier to wisdom and mental health. Studies show that the most psychologically mature individuals demonstrate cognitive complexity, the ability to hold seemingly contradictory perspectives simultaneously while recognizing the partial truth in different viewpoints. This capacity allows for more nuanced understanding than either-or thinking can provide, precisely what Jesus demonstrated in these interactions. Rebecca, a mediator working with divided communities, applies this principle in highly polarized situations. I've found that the most difficult conflicts aren't resolved by determining which side is entirely right, she explains. Transformation happens when people recognize legitimate concerns on both sides while discovering deeper principles that transcend the perceived dichotomy. In my experience, the most important truth often emerges in the space beyond the forced choices people initially present. This ability to question the framing of issues, not just debate within established parameters, offers a profound resource for everyone navigating today's polarized discourse. Rather than accepting the binary options cultural debates often present, you must be either for this or against it, we might follow this pattern of questioning the questions themselves. What assumptions does this framing contain? What deeper principles might transcend the presented dichotomy? What perspective might honor legitimate concerns on multiple sides while pointing toward more integrative understanding? Jesus' responses consistently directed attention beyond surface-level debates to heart issues. When tested about the greatest commandment, another attempt to trap him in prioritizing certain laws over others, he identified love of God and neighbor as the foundation from which all other commandments flow. Matthew 22:37-40. This approach distinguished between fundamental principles and their various applications, a crucial distinction often lost in debates where specific applications are treated as equivalent to core principles themselves. Multiple wisdom traditions recognize this limitation of either-or thinking. Eastern philosophies often emphasize the complementarity of seemingly opposite forces. Indigenous approaches frequently seek harmony and integration rather than opposition. Modern complexity science demonstrates how apparently contradictory patterns can be different aspects of larger, more comprehensive systems. These diverse traditions converge in recognizing that our most significant questions often transcend simple binary answers. I invite you to identify one area where you feel pressured to accept a simplistic either-or framing, perhaps a political, religious, relational, or personal issue where nuance seems unwelcome. Practice questioning the question itself. What assumptions are embedded in how this issue is framed? What perspective might honor legitimate concerns on multiple sides? What deeper principles might transcend the presented dichotomy? This practice doesn't guarantee easy answers, but often reveals more thoughtful approaches than the false choices initially presented. For those engaged in particularly polarized discussions, consider developing the habit of first identifying points of agreement and legitimate concerns on different sides before expressing your own perspective. This approach doesn't require abandoning conviction, but demonstrates the cognitive maturity to recognize partial truth in different viewpoints, creating space for more integrative understanding to emerge. The revelation of questioned authority doesn't reject the concept of truth itself, but invites us beyond simplistic formulations that fail to capture life's genuine complexity. Whether viewed through spiritual or secular lenses, this capacity to think beyond false dichotomies offers an essential resource for navigating a complex world where wisdom often lies beyond the artificial limitations of the questions we initially ask. Number 4, the revelation of prophetic perspective, seeing beyond appearances. Have you ever felt overwhelmed by troubling circumstances, unable to see any meaning or purpose beyond the immediate crisis? The Wednesday of Holy Week offers our fourth revelation through Jesus' prophetic teachings about the future, insights that demonstrate how a longer view fundamentally transforms how we experience present challenges. Though the Gospels don't specifically mention Wednesday's events, many scholars believe this was when Jesus delivered his extensive teachings about future challenges and ultimate restoration, recorded in Matthew chapters 24-25. Speaking from the Mount of Olives overlooking Jerusalem, Jesus described coming destruction and difficulties while simultaneously assuring followers that these events, however devastating, weren't the final word. This prophetic perspective reveals something profound, the ability to see beyond immediate circumstances to larger patterns of meaning can radically transform how we experience present difficulties. What's striking about Jesus' prophetic teaching isn't just its content but its timing, delivered during the week leading to his execution while facing his own imminent suffering. Rather than becoming absorbed in immediate threats, he maintained a perspective that encompassed both honest acknowledgement of coming pain and confident assurance of ultimate restoration. This capacity to hold both reality and hope simultaneously offers a powerful resource for everyone facing disorienting challenges. Research in psychological resilience identifies meaning-making as a crucial factor distinguishing those who merely survive trauma from those who experience post-traumatic growth. Studies show that people who can place difficult experiences within larger, meaningful narratives demonstrate significantly better outcomes than those who perceive adversity as random and meaningless. This doesn't minimize suffering, but transforms how it's experienced, precisely what prophetic perspective offers. Elena, an immigrant who fled political violence, describes how this principle transformed her displacement experience. When we were forced to leave our home with just what we could carry, I felt completely untethered, like our family story had been severed. An elder in our community helped me see our experience as part of a larger human pattern of exile and return that stretched back centuries. This didn't make our losses less painful, but it placed them within a meaningful framework where we weren't just passive victims, but participants in a significant human journey. This perspective gave me strength to build a new life while honoring what was lost. This prophetic capacity, seeing present circumstances within larger patterns of meaning, doesn't require specific religious beliefs, but offers a psychological and spiritual resource available to everyone. It suggests questions worth considering in any challenging situation. What larger story might this difficult experience be part of? What meaning becomes possible if I view this challenge within a more expansive time frame? What perspective would transform how I experience this circumstance without denying its reality? The essential quality of prophetic perspective isn't prediction, but discernment, seeing what's actually happening beneath surface appearances. When Jesus prophesied Jerusalem's destruction, he wasn't merely forecasting future events, but recognizing trajectories already underway that others missed. Similarly, developing prophetic perspective in our lives involves becoming more attentive to deeper currents beneath surface events, recognizing patterns, trajectories, and meanings that aren't immediately obvious, but fundamentally change how we interpret experience. Various wisdom traditions recognize this capacity for expanded perspective. Buddhist mindfulness practices develop the ability to observe experiences without being completely identified with them. Stoic philosophy emphasizes viewing present circumstances within cosmic perspective. Indigenous cultures often interpret current events through the lens of ancestral wisdom and future generations. These diverse approaches converge in recognizing how transformed perception changes lived experience without denying reality. I invite you to practice prophetic perspective with one challenging circumstance you're currently facing. Begin by acknowledging its difficulty without minimization. Then gradually expand your viewpoint. How might this situation look from 5 years in the future? What meaning might emerge if this challenge were part of a larger story still unfolding? What becomes visible from an expanded perspective that isn't apparent from within the immediate difficulty? This practice doesn't eliminate problems, but often reveals dimensions of meaning and possibility obscured by exclusive focus on immediate circumstances. For those facing particularly disorienting challenges, consider developing a regular practice of zooming out from immediate difficulties to recognize larger contexts and meanings. This might involve journaling about your situation from different time perspectives, conversing with trusted friends who offer broader viewpoints, or connecting your experience with others who have navigated similar challenges in different contexts. These practices cultivate prophetic capacity to see beyond appearances to deeper patterns of meaning. The revelation of prophetic perspective doesn't offer escape from life's genuine difficulties, but it provides a more spacious vantage point from which to experience them. Whether viewed through spiritual or secular lenses, this capacity to see beyond immediate circumstances to larger patterns of meaning offers an essential resource for maintaining hope and purpose amid life's most challenging seasons. Number 5, the revelation of sacred communion, discovering connection beyond transaction. Have you noticed how many of our interactions, even important ones, have become transactional rather than genuinely connective? Thursday of Holy Week reveals our 5th transformative insight as Jesus shares a final meal with his disciples, washing their feet and establishing communion as an ongoing practice. These intimate acts demonstrate something our efficiency-focused world often misses: the irreplaceable power of sacred communion for human flourishing. The Last Supper narratives emphasize extraordinary intimacy amid approaching crisis. Jesus washed his disciples' feet, a servant's task nobody else had undertaken. He shared bread and wine with profound significance, including the one who would betray him. He spoke his most intimate teachings recorded in John 14-17. These actions reveal essential human wisdom. Genuine communion creates a quality of connection that transactional relationships cannot produce, sustaining us through life's most challenging transitions. What makes these communion moments particularly striking is their deliberate countercultural nature. In a hierarchical society, the acknowledged leader performing a servant's task of foot washing violated all expectations. In a status-conscious culture, sharing a covenant meal with fishermen, tax collectors, and those about to abandon him defied social norms. These boundary-crossing practices reveal something universal. Authentic communion often requires transcending conventional categories that separate people from each other. Contemporary research in neuroscience confirms what these ancient practices suggest. Studies in interpersonal neurobiology demonstrate that humans are fundamentally wired for connection. Our nervous systems literally regulate through relationships. Research shows that meaningful social bonds reduce stress hormones, strengthen immune function, and activate brain regions associated with well-being and resilience. This science confirms ancient wisdom. Communion isn't a luxury, but a biological and spiritual necessity for human thriving. Jason, a technology executive, discovered this principle after health issues forced him to reevaluate his approach to relationships. I had built my life around achievement and efficiency, even scheduling quality time with family in 30-minute blocks between meetings. When stress-related health problems developed, my doctor asked about my support system, and I realized most of my relationships had become transactional exchanges rather than genuine connections. Learning to create unrushed space for real communion with family, friends, and in my own contemplative practices wasn't just personally enriching, it literally saved my health. What many find transformative about this revelation is recognizing that communion operates by fundamentally different principles than transaction. Transactional interactions focus on efficient exchange, maximizing return on investment, and moving quickly to next objectives. Communion involves presence, attentiveness, and recognition of inherent rather than instrumental value. Most of us need both modes in different contexts, but problems develop when transactional approaches dominate spaces where communion is essential for well-being. The Last Supper communion practice specifically addresses human tendencies toward fragmentation. Jesus stated, "This is my body. This is my blood," integrating physical elements with spiritual significance, connecting present experience with historical memory, and uniting individual participants in shared practice. This integration offers wisdom for everyone. Communion practices, whether spiritual or secular, create coherence and meaning by connecting dimensions of experience often fragmented in contemporary life. Multiple traditions recognize this communion necessity. Diverse religious practices worldwide center around shared meals, symbolically representing connection beyond ordinary exchange. Secular communal rituals, from family dinners to cultural celebrations, similarly create spaces where people experience belonging beyond instrumental relationships. Psychology recognizes that humans fundamentally need both autonomy and communion, independence and connection for psychological health. I invite you to reflect on the balance of transaction and communion in your life. Where have potentially sacred connections become primarily transactional? What relationships or practices create genuine communion that sustains you through challenges? Consider creating intentional communion space this week. Perhaps an unhurried meal with loved ones, a contemplative walk in nature, or a conversation focused on authentic connection rather than practical outcomes. These simple practices often restore dimensions of well-being that exclusively transactional living cannot provide. For those seeking to develop stronger communion practices, consider establishing regular rituals that honor connection beyond utility. These might be explicitly spiritual or simply humanizing. Family meals without devices, regular coffee with friends without agenda, contemplative practices that nurture connection with your deeper self, or community gatherings that celebrate shared humanity beyond functional roles. Such practices don't require specific beliefs, but honor the universal human need for connection beyond transaction. The revelation of sacred communion doesn't reject practical necessity, but recognizes that human flourishing requires more than efficient function. Whether approached through spiritual tradition or secular humanism, this wisdom about authentic connection addresses a fundamental human need, often neglected in our productivity-focused culture, offering an essential resource for maintaining wholeness amid life's inevitable challenges. Number 6, the revelation of surrendered strength, finding power in vulnerability. Have you ever found yourself exhausting your strength trying to maintain control over uncontrollable circumstances? The Garden of Gethsemane scene on Thursday night reveals our 6th revelation as Jesus faces his most intense internal struggle, demonstrating a paradoxical truth. Authentic strength often emerges not through asserting control, but through the vulnerable strength of surrender. The Gospel accounts describe Jesus in profound distress, sweating blood, falling to the ground, and repeatedly asking if another path might be possible. Luke 22:39-44. What makes this scene remarkable isn't just Jesus' honesty about his anguish, but the framework of surrender that transforms his struggle. Yet not my will, but yours be done. This profound surrender reveals a counterintuitive path to genuine strength that contradicts many cultural assumptions, but offers wisdom for navigating our most challenging circumstances. This Gethsemane moment reveals an essential distinction between surrender and resignation. Resignation is passive defeat, giving up because we see no alternatives. Surrender, as demonstrated here, is active alignment with deeper wisdom and larger purpose beyond our immediate desires. Not weakness, but a different quality of strength that emerges when controlling isn't possible or productive. This distinction offers crucial insight for everyone facing circumstances that cannot be overcome through conventional strength. Research in stress resilience distinguishes between controllable and uncontrollable stresses, showing that different approaches are necessary for each. Studies demonstrate that applying control-oriented strategies to uncontrollable situations significantly increases psychological distress and physical stress markers. Conversely, acceptance-based approaches to genuinely uncontrollable circumstances reduce stress hormones and improve psychological outcomes. This science confirms ancient wisdom. Knowing when to surrender rather than control represents essential discernment for well-being. Marcus, a former military officer facing terminal cancer, describes how this principle transformed his approach to mortality. My entire life had been built around overcoming obstacles through determination and strength. When my diagnosis came with no treatment options, I initially approached death as another enemy to defeat through sheer willpower. This created immense suffering for both me and my family. A hospice chaplain helped me recognize that genuine strength in my situation involved a different capacity. the courage to surrender fighting what couldn't be changed while focusing my remaining energy on what truly mattered. This surrender wasn't giving up, but shifting from exhausting resistance to meaningful engagement with the actual reality before me. What many find transformative about this revelation is how it challenges cultural narratives, equating strength exclusively with control, domination, or never showing vulnerability. The Gethsemane scene offers a more nuanced understanding. Authentic strength includes knowing when asserting control depletes vital energy that could be redirected toward meaningful purpose within actual constraints. This wisdom doesn't glorify suffering, but offers practical discernment for navigating it with less wasted energy and greater inner resource. The specific phrase, "not my will but yours," reflects a spiritual framework. But the principle of surrendering to wisdom beyond our limited perspective transcends particular belief systems. Various contemplative traditions recognize that excessive attachment to our preferences and demands creates suffering, while alignment with larger realities, whether framed as divine will, natural order, or acceptance of what cannot be changed, creates internal freedom and more effective engagement with actual circumstances rather than wished-for alternatives. This surrender principle appears across diverse wisdom approaches. The Serenity Prayer's distinction between what can and cannot be changed reflects this same discernment. Addiction recovery programs consistently identify surrender as the essential first step toward healing. Acceptance and commitment. Therapy, a well-researched psychological approach, emphasizes accepting uncontrollable realities while committing to valued action within actual constraints rather than fighting against them. I invite you to identify one circumstance in your life where you may be exhausting strength in resistance to what cannot be changed. This might involve a health condition, relationship situation, past event that can't be undone, or present limitation that isn't currently resolvable. Practice distinguishing between what aspects might be amenable to change through action versus what currently requires the strength of acceptance. Consider what energy might be liberated for meaningful purpose if you stopped fighting what cannot presently be changed. For those facing particularly challenging surrender moments, consider developing language that honors the active, courageous nature of this process rather than framing it as defeat. Rather than giving up, this might involve opening to larger wisdom, releasing exhausting resistance, or aligning with reality as it actually is. This linguistic shift often helps recognize surrender as a form of strength rather than its absence, a crucial distinction for maintaining dignity amid necessary acceptance. The revelation of surrendered strength doesn't promote passivity or endorse unjust circumstances, but it offers essential discernment between what can be changed through action and what currently requires acceptance to avoid wasting precious life energy. Whether viewed through spiritual or secular frameworks, this wisdom about when to assert control versus when to surrender it addresses universal human challenges, offering a more nuanced understanding of authentic strength than simplistic cultural narratives provide. Number 7. The revelation of redemptive suffering, finding meaning in pain. Have you ever wondered if the pain you're experiencing could possibly serve any purpose beyond mere survival? Good Friday reveals our seventh and perhaps most profound revelation as Jesus endures crucifixion, demonstrating how suffering, while never good in itself, can become a pathway to transformation and new life when approached with redemptive perspective. The crucifixion narrative contains a paradox at the heart of human experience. What appeared to be ultimate defeat became the catalyst for history's most significant renewal. The Gospel of John records Jesus saying from the cross, "It is finished," John 19:30, words easily misinterpreted as resignation, but actually declaring accomplished purpose. This redemptive framing of suffering reveals something universal. While pain is never inherently good, how we interpret and respond to it fundamentally shapes what it produces in our lives and communities. What makes the Good Friday revelation particularly powerful is that it doesn't minimize suffering's reality, but transforms its meaning. The cross acknowledges pain's genuine severity while revealing how it can become paradoxically productive, not because suffering itself is valuable, but because how we carry it can release unexpected growth, compassion, and purpose that prosperity alone rarely produces. This perspective offers vital wisdom for everyone navigating life's inevitable painful passages. Contemporary research in post-traumatic growth provides scientific support for this ancient insight. Studies show that many people experience profound positive transformation following traumatic events, not despite their suffering, but through how they engage with it. Research identifies key factors enabling growth through adversity: finding meaning in the experience, connecting with supportive community, and integrating the suffering into a coherent life narrative rather than seeing it as meaningless interruption. These findings confirm what the crucifixion story suggests. Redemptive framing transforms how suffering is experienced and what it produces. Olivia, who survived childhood cancer, describes how this principle transformed her relationship with suffering. For years after treatment, I saw my illness only as something horrible that had stolen my childhood. A mentor helped me recognize how my experience had also developed extraordinary empathy, perspective, and appreciation for life that now enables me to connect with others facing similar challenges. This doesn't make cancer good. I would never wish it on anyone, but it helped me find redemptive purpose within an experience I couldn't change. Now I volunteer with pediatric patients, offering an understanding that only someone who's walked a similar path can provide. Indeed, what many find transformative about this revelation is how it offers an alternative to both toxic positivity that denies suffering's reality and hopeless despair that sees no possibility of meaning within it. The cross represents a third path: unflinching acknowledgement of pain's severity combined with trust that it can somehow be integrated into a larger story of purpose and renewal. This perspective doesn't explain suffering away, but provides resources for moving through it with dignity and hope. The crucifixion specifically reframes abandonment and apparent divine absence. Jesus crying out, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" Matthew 27:46. This acknowledgement of spiritual desolation reveals that redemptive suffering doesn't require pretending to feel God's presence when that experience is absent. Instead, it suggests that even the experience of abandonment itself can become part of a larger redemptive journey, a profound comfort for those navigating similar spiritual darkness while seeking meaning within it. Various wisdom traditions recognize this transformative potential within suffering. Buddhist teachings emphasize how suffering, while not desirable, often awakens compassion and non-attachment that prosperity rarely develops. Indigenous cultures worldwide include initiation rituals involving deliberate hardship to facilitate transformation from one life stage to another. Modern psychology recognizes how navigating adversity often develops resilience, empathy, and wisdom, not accessible through continuous comfort. I invite you to reflect on one painful experience in your life, past or present, through this redemptive lens. This doesn't mean forcing positive interpretation on genuine suffering, but asking different questions about it. What capacity has this difficulty developed in me that might not have emerged otherwise? How has this experience connected me with others in ways that ease would not have? What perspective or wisdom has emerged through this pain that might serve purposes beyond my individual experience? These questions don't justify suffering, but often reveal dimensions of meaning within it that now transform how it's carried. For those currently navigating intense suffering, consider developing language that acknowledges both its genuine difficulty and potential meaning. Rather than feeling pressure to frame pain positively, many find it helpful to hold both acknowledgement, "This is genuinely difficult, and I would not have chosen it," alongside tentative openness to possible purpose. "I remain open to ways this experience might eventually serve meaning beyond what I can currently see." This balanced approach honors suffering's reality while remaining receptive to redemptive possibilities that may gradually emerge. The revelation of redemptive suffering doesn't offer simplistic answers to life's most painful questions, but it provides a framework for engaging difficulty that neither denies its reality nor surrenders to meaninglessness within it. Whether viewed through explicitly spiritual or broadly humanistic lenses, this perspective on suffering addresses a universal human need, finding purpose within pain that cannot be avoided, and making meaning of experiences we would never have chosen but must somehow integrate into coherent, purposeful lives. Number 8. The revelation of Holy Saturday silence. Finding God in apparent absence. Have you ever experienced a period of profound silence, a season when answers don't come, progress seems absent, and even spiritual connection feels distant or non-existent? Holy Saturday offers our 8th revelation as Jesus' body lay in the tomb, while disciples waited in confusion and apparent abandonment, revealing wisdom about those mysterious middle spaces between endings and new beginnings that every human journey includes. The Gospel accounts say remarkably little about this silent Saturday, creating a narrative gap that mirrors the experience itself. We know the disciples gathered behind locked doors in fear and uncertainty. John 20:19. From their perspective, everything had ended tragically, with no indication that resurrection would follow. This apparently empty interim reveals something profound. Between significant endings and new beginnings often lies a necessary period of uncertainty, waiting, and transformation that cannot be rushed, but serves essential purpose in preparing for what comes next. What makes Holy Saturday particularly challenging is its open-endedness. The disciples had no guarantee of how long their period of confusion and waiting would last. Similarly, our tomb times rarely come with expiration dates or clear indicators of when new life will emerge. This ambiguity requires a distinctive spiritual capacity, the ability to maintain hope and meaning during extended periods of uncertainty when outcomes remain unclear and divine presence seems absent. Developmental psychology recognizes similar patterns in human growth through the concept of liminal space, threshold periods between one identity or life stage and another. Research shows these uncertain transitions, while disorienting, often allow essential internal reorganization that enables new capacities and perspectives to emerge. Just as a caterpillar must dissolve into formless liquid within its chrysalis before butterfly formation becomes possible, human development frequently requires disorienting middle spaces between old forms and new possibilities. Thomas, a physician who lost his practice due to addiction before eventually becoming a recovery counselor, describes how this principle transformed his understanding of apparent emptiness. "After losing my medical license, I entered what felt like a tomb of professional identity death with no clear future. For nearly 2 years, I existed in this confusing middle space. My old life was clearly over, but nothing new had emerged to replace it. Looking back, I realize now that this apparent empty time was actually filled with essential internal work happening beneath my awareness. Important dismantling and preparation were occurring that made my eventual new direction possible. What felt like meaningless waiting was actually necessary incubation." What many find transformative about this revelation is how it reframes periods of apparent emptiness, confusion, or divine silence. Rather than interpreting these experiences as meaningless voids to escape as quickly as possible, Holy Saturday suggests they might be necessary incubation periods where essential preparation occurs beneath conscious awareness. This perspective doesn't eliminate the discomfort of waiting, but offers meaning within it, transforming how these inevitable middle spaces are experienced. The tomb setting of Holy Saturday adds another dimension to this understanding. Transformation often requires protective enclosure. Just as seeds require darkness and shells before germination becomes possible, significant human renewal frequently needs sheltered space removed from external demands and expectations. The disciples gathering behind locked doors mirrors this pattern, creating intentional separation during vulnerable transition before new public expression becomes possible. This wisdom suggests that periods of withdrawal during major life transitions aren't necessarily avoidance, but potentially necessary protection for emerging growth. Various wisdom traditions recognize this transformative potential in apparent emptiness. The desert tradition within Christianity emphasizes how divine absence often precedes deeper presence. Jewish mysticism describes tzimtzum, divine contraction that creates space for new possibility. Taoist philosophy emphasizes how emptiness within a vessel creates its usefulness. Modern physics identifies how quantum particles emerge from and return to a vacuum state that appears empty, but contains all potential. These diverse perspectives converge in recognizing how apparent absence often serves as the matrix from which new forms emerge. I invite you to reflect on one apparent empty space in your life, perhaps a period of waiting, a season of confusion or divine silence, or a transition where the old has clearly ended, but the new hasn't yet emerged. Consider this Holy Saturday perspective. What if this apparent emptiness actually contains necessary preparation you cannot yet perceive? What might be incubating in this tomb-like space that requires protection before it can safely emerge? What would change if you viewed this period not as meaningless interruption, but as essential incubation between what was and what will be? For those currently navigating confusing middle spaces, consider developing practices that honor both the difficulty of waiting and its potential purpose. This might involve creating intentional holding rituals that acknowledge the tension of unresolved transition, perhaps lighting a candle each day representing both the reality of present uncertainty and trust in eventual clarity, or journaling that expresses honest confusion while remaining open to meaning you cannot yet see. These practices don't eliminate discomfort, but often create capacity to carry it with greater patience and trust. The revelation of Holy Saturday silence doesn't provide easy answers for periods of confusion, waiting, or apparent divine absence, but it offers a more spacious perspective on their potential purpose. Whether viewed through explicitly religious frameworks or broadly human developmental patterns, this understanding of necessary middle spaces addresses a universal experience, helping us navigate those inevitable seasons when old forms have clearly ended but new life hasn't yet emerged with visible clarity. Number 9, the revelation of resurrection recognition, seeing with new eyes. Have you ever had an experience so unexpected that you initially couldn't recognize its significance or even perceive what was happening? Easter Sunday provides our 9th revelation through disciples' varied responses to resurrection, revealing how transformative encounters often require new ways of seeing that develop gradually rather than instantaneously as we learn to recognize what our existing frameworks cannot immediately comprehend. The Gospel accounts emphasize how resurrection wasn't immediately recognizable even to those who had known Jesus intimately. Mary Magdalene initially mistook him for a gardener, John 20:15. The Emmaus travelers walked 7 miles with Jesus without recognizing him, Luke 24:13-16. Thomas demanded physical evidence before accepting what others had seen, John 20:25. These recognition difficulties reveal something profound. Truly transformative realities often exceed our existing perceptual frameworks, requiring gradual development of new ways of seeing rather than instant comprehension. What makes this recognition challenge particularly significant is that it wasn't primarily about physical perception, but conceptual frameworks that determined what could be recognized as possible. The disciples didn't fail to see Jesus because of poor eyesight, but because resurrection existed completely outside their understanding of reality's possibilities. This pattern continues in how humans encounter transformative insights across domains. Our existing mental models often determine what we can perceive, requiring expansion before genuinely novel realities become recognizable. Cognitive science describes this recognition challenge through the concept of schema, mental frameworks that organize our understanding of how reality works. Research shows that information fitting existing schemas is easily processed, while contradictory information often gets filtered out or misinterpreted to preserve cognitive consistency. This explains why genuinely new possibilities frequently remain invisible until our mental frameworks expand to include them. Precisely what the disciples experienced with resurrection's unprecedented reality. Alexis, a corporate executive who transformed her company's approach to environmental sustainability, describes how this principle manifested in organizational change. When we first proposed regenerative business practices beyond mere compliance, most colleagues literally couldn't see the possibilities. Not because they were unintelligent, but because these approaches contradicted their fundamental assumptions about what business success could look like. The turning point came not through better arguments, but through experiences that expanded their perception. Visiting companies successfully implementing these approaches and witnessing tangible benefits firsthand. Like the disciples touching Jesus' wounds, they needed direct encounter with what seemed impossible before recognition could occur. I.e., what many find transformative about this revelation is how it normalizes the gradual, often disorienting process of recognizing genuinely new possibilities. Rather than expecting instant comprehension of transformative insights, whether spiritual or practical, resurrection recognition suggests that significant perceptual expansion typically occurs through progressive encounters that gradually stretch existing frameworks until new realities become visible. This patience with the recognition process creates space for genuine transformation, rather than dismissing what doesn't immediately fit our current understanding. The disciples' varied recognition pathways reveal another important aspect of this principle. Different people often require different types of encounters before recognition becomes possible. Mary recognized Jesus when he spoke her name, John 20:16, engaging emotional connection. Thomas needed physical evidence through touch, John 20:27. The Emmaus travelers recognized Jesus through familiar actions at a shared meal, Luke 24:30-31. This diversity suggests that transformative recognition often requires multiple approaches addressing different aspects of human perception, intellectual, emotional, experiential, and relational, rather than assuming one pathway works for everyone. Various wisdom traditions acknowledge this recognition challenge. Zen Buddhism employs koans, paradoxical statements designed to break through limited conceptual frameworks. Indigenous teaching often uses symbolic stories that communicate truths inexpressible through direct statement. Modern education increasingly emphasizes experiential learning alongside conceptual instruction. These diverse approaches converge in recognizing that transformative comprehension typically requires more than information alone. It demands experiences that expand perceptual capacity beyond existing limitations. I invite you to reflect on one area where expanded perception might reveal possibilities currently invisible to you. This might involve a persistent problem where all solutions seem inadequate, a relationship dynamic that feels stuck in repetitive patterns, or a spiritual question where conventional answers feel insufficient. Consider what experiences, rather than merely new information, might expand your perception in this area. What direct encounters might help you recognize possibilities that existing frameworks currently filter out? For those seeking expanded perception in important areas, Consider developing practices that intentionally disrupt habitual seeing. This might involve experiencing environments or perspectives significantly different from your own, engaging with people who hold fundamentally different worldviews without immediate judgment, or participating in creative activities that deliberately challenge conventional perception. These experiences often function like resurrection appearances, creating encounters with possibility that gradually expand what we can recognize and respond to with engaged awareness. The revelation of resurrection recognition doesn't diminish the importance of critical thinking, but acknowledges that truly transformative realities often initially appear impossible within existing frameworks. Whether applied to spiritual insights, creative innovation, or personal growth, this understanding of expanded perception addresses a universal human challenge, helping us remain open to possibilities that may initially seem implausible, but contain potential beyond what our current seeing can immediately recognize. Number 10, the revelation of embodied faith, making truth tangible. Have you noticed how easy it is for beliefs to remain abstract concepts without transforming how we actually live? The post-resurrection appearances reveal our 10th insight, as Jesus repeatedly emphasized the physical, tangible nature of his presence. Inviting Thomas to touch his wounds, preparing breakfast by the lakeshore, and eating fish to demonstrate his bodily reality. These encounters reveal a profound truth. Transformative faith requires embodiment, moving beyond intellectual concepts to tangible expression in how we live, relate, and engage the physical world. What makes these resurrection appearances particularly striking is their deliberate physicality in a cultural context where spiritual truth was often associated with disembodied abstraction. Jesus didn't present resurrection as merely spiritual concept, but as embodied reality that could be touched, that prepared meals, and that engaged with material existence. This insistence on tangibility reveals something universal. Transformative truth doesn't merely inform our thinking, but reshapes our physical existence, relationships, and engagement with the concrete world around us. The disciples' initial difficulty recognizing Jesus stemmed partly from expecting a purely spiritual manifestation rather than embodied presence. Luke specifically records their thinking they saw a ghost until Jesus invited them to touch him and shared physical food, Luke 24:36-43. This correction reveals an essential distinction between abstract belief and embodied faith. One remains conceptual, while the other transforms tangible reality through concrete expression that others can see, touch, and experience directly. Contemporary neuroscience supports this connection between embodiment and genuine integration through research on embodied cognition. The understanding that human thinking doesn't occur solely in the brain, but throughout the body's full sensory motor system. Studies show that physical actions literally shape cognitive processes, while abstract concepts without bodily engagement remain partially processed and less integrated into actual behavior. This science confirms ancient wisdom. Truth becomes transformative when embodied rather than merely contemplated. Marcus, an architect who transformed his firm's approach to community development, describes how this principle revolutionized his professional practice. For years, I intellectually believed in equitable design that genuinely served community needs, but my actual projects remained conventional. Everything changed when I moved our design process from conference rooms into the communities we served, experiencing their physical reality, sharing meals in residents' homes, and involving community members as co-designers rather than just receiving input. This embodied engagement completely transformed our work from well-intentioned theory to tangible practice that produces measurably different outcomes. The difference wasn't better concepts, but embodied rather than merely intellectual engagement. What many find transformative about this revelation is recognizing how easily faith becomes primarily cognitive, concepts we mentally affirm without corresponding changes in physical behavior, resource allocation, time investment, or relational engagement. Embodied faith requires tangible expression through concrete actions, choices, and priorities that others can experience directly rather than merely ideas we intellectually endorse. This shift from abstract belief to embodied practice often marks the difference between religious concepts and transformative faith. The specific bodily evidence Jesus provided, wounds from crucifixion still visible in his resurrected body, adds another dimension to this understanding. Authentic embodiment integrates difficult experiences rather than erasing them. The resurrected body carried marks of suffering rather than appearing as idealized form without history. This integration reveals how embodied faith doesn't require pretending painful experiences never happened, but incorporating them into authentic presence that neither denies difficulty nor remains defined by it. Various wisdom traditions emphasize this embodiment necessity. Jewish practice centers around physical observances that engage the entire person rather than merely intellectual affirmation. Buddhist mindfulness practices intentionally ground awareness in bodily experience rather than abstract thought. Indigenous spiritual approaches typically involve physical ceremony, movement, and sensory engagement rather than disembodied concepts. These diverse approaches converge in recognizing that transformative truth requires whole-person embodiment rather than merely mental agreement. I invite you to reflect on one belief you intellectually affirm, but may not have fully embodied in tangible practice. This might involve a spiritual principle, relationship value, health commitment, or ethical stance that remains primarily conceptual rather than consistently expressed in concrete choices and actions. Consider what specific, physical steps might more fully embody this truth in ways others could directly experience through your actual behavior rather than merely through your words or intentions. For those seeking greater integration between beliefs and practice, consider developing regular embodiment inquiries regarding important values. This might involve periodically asking questions like, how is this belief expressed in how I use my physical energy? How is it reflected in my calendar and actual time investments? How would others experience this value through my tangible behavior rather than my stated intentions? What physical evidence would demonstrate this principle's reality in my life? These concrete questions often reveal gaps between conceptual endorsement and embodied reality. The revelation of embodied faith doesn't diminish the importance of intellectual understanding, but recognizes that transformative truth must ultimately be incarnated in tangible form to fulfill its purpose. Whether approached through explicitly spiritual frameworks or broad human development principles, this insight about integration between belief and embodied practice addresses a universal human challenge, helping us move beyond merely thinking differently to actually living differently in ways that others can directly experience through our embodied presence in the world. Number 11. The revelation of commissioned identity, from consumers to contributors. Have you noticed how contemporary culture constantly positions us primarily as consumers, people whose main identity involves receiving products, services, and experiences others create? The post-resurrection appearances reveal our 11th insight as Jesus consistently commissioned disciples into active participation in his ongoing work. As the Father has sent me, I am sending you. John 20:21. This commissioning reveals a profound truth about human flourishing. We find our deepest fulfillment not primarily as spiritual consumers, but as active participants in purposes larger than our individual experience. What makes this commissioning particularly significant is how it redirected the disciples' focus from backward-looking amazement at resurrection to forward-looking participation in its implications. Rather than establishing a pattern of passive religious commemoration, Jesus immediately connected their encounter with him to active engagement with others. Go and make disciples. Matthew 28:19. This reorientation reveals something universal. Transformative spiritual experience naturally extends beyond personal benefit toward active contribution that expresses its impact through tangible engagement with the world's needs and possibilities. The specific language of sending emphasizes active authorization rather than mere suggestion. The Greek word for sent, apostello, carries connotations of delegated authority and representation, the same root that gives us apostle. This commissioning language reveals a fundamental shift in identity from spectators or recipients to authorized representatives carrying genuine capacity to extend the very reality they have experienced. This identity transformation addresses a core human need for purpose beyond self-focused consumption or mere religious experience. Psychology research consistently identifies generativity, contributing to causes and concerns beyond oneself, as essential for sustained well-being and meaning across the lifespan. Studies show that people primarily focused on receiving experiences and meeting personal needs typically report lower life satisfaction than those actively contributing to purposes larger than themselves, regardless of external circumstances. This science confirms what the commissioning pattern suggests. Humans flourish through active participation in meaningful contribution, not merely through spiritual consumption. Elena, who transformed her approach to faith after years of discouragement, describes how this principle revolutionized her spiritual journey. I had approached religion primarily as a consumer, attending services, reading books, and participating in programs, always hoping to receive experiences that would fulfill my spiritual needs. Despite sincere effort, this approach left me increasingly empty. Everything changed when a mentor helped me recognize that faith isn't primarily about what I receive, but what I'm commissioned to contribute. Shifting from religious consumer to active participant in serving community needs completely transformed not just my impact, but my own sense of purpose and connection. What years of seeking spiritual experiences couldn't provide, commissioned participation immediately began developing. What many find transformative about this revelation is how it fundamentally reframes spiritual identity from primarily receiving to actively extending what we've experienced. Rather than measuring spiritual growth primarily through what we know, feel, or receive, commissioned identity focuses on how we're actively participating in purposes beyond ourselves, extending love, justice, beauty, healing, or other expressions of resurrection life into contexts that need precisely what we've been uniquely positioned to contribute. The commissioning specifically connected with the gift of the Holy Spirit. Receive the Holy Spirit, John 20:22. This linking of divine presence with active sending reveals another essential understanding. Commissioned identity doesn't require generating impact through personal capacity alone, but participating in purposes empowered by resources beyond our individual limitations. This connection between receiving and extending addresses the common fear that commissioned identity demands depleting personal reserves rather than channeling resources that continually renew through the very act of their expression. Various wisdom traditions recognize this contribution necessity. The Jewish concept of tikkun olam emphasizes active participation in world repair as central to human purpose. Buddhist traditions emphasize compassionate action for others' benefit as essential to the enlightenment path. Indigenous approaches typically emphasize responsibility to both community and creation as fundamental to identity. These diverse perspectives converge in recognizing that humans flourish through active contribution to concerns beyond individual benefit. I invite you to reflect on the balance between consumption and contribution in your approach to spiritual growth. Where might you have adopted primarily consumer patterns, focusing on what you receive, learn, or experience without corresponding extension of those resources toward others' needs. Consider one specific way you might express more commissioned identity, actively contributing some aspect of what you've received in a context where that particular gift could address genuine need or possibility. For those seeking to develop stronger commissioned identity, consider intentionally reframing how you approach spiritual resources. Rather than asking only, "What did I receive from this?" also ask, "Who needs what I've received, and how might I extend it?" This simple reorientation often reveals immediate opportunities for meaningful contribution that transform not only the contexts we engage, but our own experience of purpose and connection. Small extensions of what we've received typically prove more transformative than continually seeking bigger spiritual experiences for ourselves. The revelation of commissioned identity doesn't reject the importance of receiving genuine spiritual nourishment, but recognizes that human flourishing requires extending what we receive rather than merely consuming it. Whether approached through explicitly religious frameworks or broader human development principles, this understanding of active participation in purposes beyond ourselves addresses a universal human need, helping us move beyond consumer identity into the deeper fulfillment that comes through meaningful contribution to concerns larger than our individual experience. Number 12. The revelation of sustainable transformation, building lasting change. Have you noticed how many significant changes, whether personal resolutions, organizational initiatives, or social movements, create initial enthusiasm but fail to produce lasting transformation? The final post-resurrection period reveals our 12th insight as Jesus instructed disciples to stay in the city until you have been clothed with power from on high. Luke 24:49, acknowledging that sustainable transformation requires more than good intentions or momentary inspiration. This patient preparation reveals profound wisdom about creating lasting change rather than temporary enthusiasm in any significant endeavor. What makes this instruction particularly striking is its timing, delivered when disciples were already convinced, committed, and seemingly ready for action. Despite their apparent readiness, Jesus recognized something essential about sustainable change. Enthusiasm without adequate foundation typically produces initial momentum, followed by discouragement when inevitable challenges arise. This waiting instruction reveals a universal principle. Lasting transformation requires developing sustainable infrastructure, internal and external resources, practices, and connections that can sustain change beyond initial inspiration. The specific focus on receiving power from on high acknowledged the gap between human intention and sustainable capacity. While the disciples had genuine commitment, Jesus recognized their need for resources beyond mere enthusiasm to sustain transformation through inevitable opposition, difficulty, and the gradual nature of meaningful change. This recognition of necessary empowerment addresses a common pattern in transformation efforts. Initial inspiration creates motivation, but rarely provides sufficient resources for sustainable implementation across changing circumstances. Contemporary research in behavioral change confirms this ancient wisdom. Studies consistently show that most change efforts fail, not from lack of initial motivation, but from insufficient support systems to sustain new patterns when enthusiasm naturally wanes or challenges arise. Successful long-term transformation typically involves creating robust infrastructures, accountability relationships, environmental adjustments, habit formation, and regular renewal practices that support continued implementation when motivation fluctuates. Marcus, who led a community development initiative that created lasting neighborhood transformation, describes how this principle proved crucial for sustainable impact. Our early efforts relied heavily on inspiration and volunteer enthusiasm, which created impressive initial momentum but consistently faded within months. Everything changed when we shifted focus from generating more excitement to building sustainable systems, developing local leadership, creating realistic funding models, establishing manageable rhythms, and building genuine community ownership. These infrastructures meant progress continued even when initial enthusiasm naturally diminished. We learned that lasting transformation requires not just compelling vision, but sustainable structures that support long-term implementation. What many find transformative about this revelation is how it challenges magical thinking about significant change, the assumption that sufficient inspiration or desire automatically produces lasting transformation. The waiting instruction acknowledges the gap between genuine intention and sustainable implementation, inviting us beyond both cynical dismissal of possibility and naive underestimation of what lasting change requires. This balanced realism creates space for authentic transformation without the discouragement that comes from change efforts built solely on unsustainable inspiration. The disciples' waiting period wasn't passive, but deeply formative. The book of Acts describes them joining together constantly in prayer, Acts 1:14, during this preparation time. This active preparation reveals another dimension of sustainable transformation. The interval between initial commitment and visible implementation serves essential purpose in developing foundations for lasting change. Rather than wasted time, this preparation period often determines whether transformation proves sustainable or merely temporary, developing resources, relationships, and rhythms necessary for long-term impact. Various wisdom traditions recognize this sustainability necessity. Contemplative practices emphasize the formation of spiritual habits rather than relying on inconsistent inspiration. Indigenous approaches typically emphasize ceremonial repetition and community reinforcement of important values. Modern organizational development focuses increasingly on systems thinking rather than individual heroics. These diverse perspectives converge in recognizing that sustainable transformation requires infrastructure beyond initial motivation, regardless of the specific change being pursued. I invite you to reflect on one significant change you genuinely desire, perhaps a personal growth area, relationship improvement, community initiative, or spiritual development. Beyond your sincere intention, consider what specific infrastructures might support sustainable implementation. What relationships could provide ongoing accountability and encouragement? What environmental adjustments might remove obstacles or add supportive elements? What regular practices would renew commitment when motivation naturally fluctuates? What realistic pace acknowledges the gradual nature of meaningful change rather than expecting immediate transformation? For those leading change efforts in any context, consider developing the discipline of asking sustainability questions alongside vision questions. How will initial inspiration be translated into ongoing motivation? What specific systems will support implementation when enthusiasm naturally wanes? Who will maintain focus when attention inevitably shifts to other priorities? What realistic timeframes acknowledge the actual pace of meaningful change in this particular context? These practical considerations often determine whether change efforts create lasting transformation or merely temporary activity. The revelation of sustainable transformation doesn't diminish the importance of vision and inspiration, but recognizes they provide only initial movement rather than complete change process. Whether approached through explicitly spiritual frameworks or practical change management principles, this understanding of what lasting transformation requires addresses a universal challenge, helping us create changes that endure beyond initial enthusiasm to produce the meaningful, sustainable impact we genuinely desire in our lives, relationships, organizations, and communities. Beyond the 7 bonus revelations for deeper transformation. We've journeyed through the 7 primary revelations of Holy Week, each offering profound insights for navigating life's complexities with greater wisdom and purpose. But the story doesn't end there. The period following Easter contains additional powerful insights that complement and extend what we've already discovered. As we continue beyond the 7 core revelations, these bonus insights explore dimensions of the post-resurrection experience that speak directly to common human challenges, finding connection despite absence and discovering the transformative power of shared testimony. These additional revelations provide further tools for navigating life's most profound questions with hope and practical wisdom. Bonus Revelation 1. The Paradox of Divine Presence. Finding closeness in apparent absence. Have you ever experienced moments when someone felt most present to you precisely when they were physically absent? The disciples' journey after Jesus' ascension reveals a fascinating paradox. They experienced a deeper, more universal connection with him after his physical departure than during his localized earthly presence. This counterintuitive reality reveals a profound truth about human connection and spiritual presence that applies far beyond religious context. After spending 40 days with the resurrected Jesus, the disciples watched him ascend, physically removing himself from their immediate access. Yet surprisingly, this apparent absence ultimately created more comprehensive presence when the Spirit came at Pentecost, enabling connection unconstrained by physical location. This pattern reveals something universal. Sometimes apparent distance can paradoxically create deeper forms of presence and connection than continuous physical proximity allows. What makes this paradox particularly relevant is how it addresses a common human experience, the fear that absence necessarily means disconnection. The post-ascension experience suggests something different, that certain forms of presence and influence actually expand through physical absence rather than diminish, creating space for different quality of connection that constant physical proximity might actually hinder. This understanding offers wisdom for navigating various forms of absence in human experience, from relational transitions to geographic separations to the ultimate absence created by death. Contemporary research in relationship psychology affirms aspects of this paradox. Studies show that certain forms of emotional intimacy and psychological presence often develop more fully when physical proximity isn't constant. Developmental research particularly highlights how healthy separation often enables deeper forms of connection than continuous contact, as evidenced in secure attachment patterns. This science aligns with the spiritual principle. Certain forms of presence paradoxically strengthen through apparent absence. Maya, who maintained a close relationship with her grandmother despite geographic separation, describes how this principle transformed her understanding of connection. When my grandmother moved across the country, I feared our relationship would diminish without regular face-to-face interaction. What surprised me was how our connection actually deepened through intentional communication that wasn't possible when proximity made us take interaction for granted. We began sharing thoughts and feelings we'd never expressed during years of living in the same town. I realized that physical presence had sometimes substituted for deeper forms of connection that distance actually facilitated. This completely transformed how I understand presence and absence in all my important relationships. Ubiko, what many find transformative about this revelation is how it reframes experiences of absence, whether temporary or permanent, that might otherwise be interpreted solely as loss. Without diminishing the genuine pain of separation, the ascension paradox suggests that absence can sometimes create space for different qualities of connection to develop. This perspective doesn't eliminate grief, but offers the possibility that certain forms of presence continue and even expand through what appears as absence, a profound comfort for navigating various separations inherent in human experience. Jesus specifically taught this paradox before his departure. "It is for your good that I am going away. Unless I go away, the advocate will not come to you." John 16:7. This counterintuitive statement acknowledged that his physical presence, while precious, actually limited certain dimensions of connection that would become possible through his apparent absence. This principle extends beyond specific religious context to a broader truth. Sometimes the absence of familiar forms of connection creates necessary space for new dimensions of relationship to develop that continuous presence in previous forms would actually prevent. Various wisdom traditions recognize this presence in absence paradox. The Taoist concept of emptiness as generative space rather than mere void reflects this understanding. Psychoanalytic approaches acknowledge how healthy separation from parents enables more complete internalization of their values and wisdom. Grief research increasingly recognizes continuing bonds theory, how relationship with deceased loved ones transforms rather than simply ends, often developing dimensions impossible during physical life. These diverse perspectives converge in recognizing that absence sometimes creates space for presence to develop in ways proximity cannot facilitate. I invite you to reflect on one experience of separation in your life, perhaps a relationship transition, geographic distance from someone important, or even the ultimate separation of death. Beyond the natural feelings of loss, consider how this apparent absence might potentially create space for different qualities of connection to develop. What forms of presence or influence might actually expand through this separation that continuous physical proximity might have limited? What dimensions of connection become possible in current circumstances that weren't accessible in previous forms of relationship? For those navigating significant separations, consider developing language and practices that honor both the reality of loss and the potential for continued connection in new forms. This might involve creating intentional ways to experience meaningful presence despite physical absence, perhaps through deliberate memory practices, symbolic representations, or cultivated awareness of continuing influence beyond physical presence. These approaches don't deny separation's pain, but create space for recognizing forms of connection that transcend immediate physical proximity. The paradox of divine presence doesn't eliminate the natural human desire for tangible connection, but offers a more expansive understanding of how presence operates beyond physical proximity alone. Whether approached through explicitly spiritual frameworks or broad human experience, this insight about presence in absence addresses universal questions about connection across various separations, offering hope that meaningful presence continues and sometimes even deepens through transitions that initially appear only as loss. Bonus Revelation 2, the community of testimony, finding voice in shared witness. Have you noticed how certain experiences become fully real to us only when we find words to express them and others to receive our expression? The early church's formation after Pentecost reveals our final insight. Transformative experiences reach their complete potential not through private possession, but through shared testimony that creates community around common recognition of significant truth. The Book of Acts describes how the disciples' personal encounters with resurrection became fully activated through public testimony, speaking their experience in ways others could receive, respond to, and ultimately share. This pattern reveals something universal. Profound experiences often complete their transformative work, not through private contemplation alone, but through the vulnerable act of finding language for what we've witnessed, and communities where that witness can be meaningfully received. What makes this testimony dynamic particularly significant is how it creates reciprocal transformation, both for those who speak their truth and those who receive it. Acts records that those who heard the disciples' testimony were cut to the heart, Acts 2:37, while the act of speaking transformed the formerly fearful disciples into people of remarkable boldness and clarity. This mutual impact reveals how testimony creates something that neither private experience nor abstract information alone can generate. Communities formed around shared recognition of truth that changes both speaker and hearer. Research in narrative psychology affirms this understanding of testimony's importance. Studies show that transformative experiences often remain partially integrated until we develop coherent language to express them and relationships where that expression can be received. The act of articulating significant experience creates neural integration between brain regions processing emotion, meaning, and language, literally completing the experience's incorporation into our understanding through the act of expressing it to others. Sophia, who survived a life-threatening illness, describes how this principle proved essential for her healing journey. For months after recovery, my experience remained strangely unreal despite having physically survived. I had the medical outcome, but not the psychological integration. What finally transformed my relationship with what happened was finding words to express my experience to a community that could genuinely receive it. Something powerful happened in that vulnerable sharing that neither private processing nor medical treatment could accomplish. The experience became fully real and meaningful through testimony in ways that silence never allowed, while creating connections with others that private healing could never have generated. What many find transformative about this revelation is recognizing that significant experiences often remain partially realized until expressed through testimony. Without diminishing the value of private reflection, the Pentecost pattern suggests that certain dimensions of transformation remain inaccessible until we risk articulating our truth to others who can meaningfully receive it. This understanding often liberates people from the limitations of private processing alone, creating courage to find voice for experiences that complete their integration and purpose through expression rather than containment. The specific Pentecost detail of speaking in various languages adds another dimension to this understanding. Effective testimony requires finding language that genuinely communicates across different perspectives and experiences. Rather than insisting others learn our language, this multilingual quality suggests that authentic testimony involves the creative work of translating truth into forms others can actually receive from their particular location. This adaptability distinguishes genuine testimony from mere proclamation, creating connection through communication that meets hearers where they actually are. Various wisdom traditions recognize this testimony necessity. Indigenous cultures worldwide emphasize storytelling as essential for both personal and communal integration of significant experience. 12-step recovery programs identify public sharing of personal truth as crucial for both individual healing and community formation. Restorative justice approaches center on testimony as essential for both victim healing and community restoration. These diverse practices converge in recognizing testimony's irreplaceable role in completing what private experience alone begins. I invite you to reflect on one significant experience in your life that may remain partially integrated because it hasn't found appropriate expression. This might involve a transformative insight, challenging circumstance, or meaningful encounter that continues to feel partially unresolved despite its importance. Consider what appropriate testimony might involve. What aspects of this experience remain unexpressed in ways that limit its complete integration? What community might provide suitable context for this expression? What language would communicate your truth in ways others could meaningfully receive? For those hesitant about vulnerable sharing, consider developing graduated testimony practices that honor both the value of expression and the necessity of appropriate context. This might involve identifying specific relationships where particular aspects of your experience could be safely shared. Journal writing that externally articulates what isn't yet ready for interpersonal expression, or creative forms like art or music that communicate truth without requiring literal language. These approaches create testimony pathways that respect both the need for expression and the importance of suitable receiving contexts. The community of testimony doesn't diminish the value of personal experience, but recognizes that private encounter often represents just the beginning of transformation that completes through shared witness. Whether approached through explicitly religious frameworks or broadly human understanding, this insight about testimony's role addresses a universal human need, helping us complete significant experiences through finding voice for our truth and communities, where that truth can create connections that private contemplation alone cannot generate. Thank you for journeying through these 7 Holy Spirit revelations from Holy Week. Your commitment to exploring these insights reflects a genuine desire for growth and understanding that goes beyond surface engagement with important ideas. Throughout this message, we've discovered how ancient wisdom from Holy Week speaks directly to universal human experiences, navigating timing beyond our control, finding purpose in disruption, discerning truth beyond simplistic answers, seeing with prophetic perspective, experiencing authentic communion, discovering strength in surrender, and finding meaning in suffering. These insights offer transformative perspective regardless of where you might be in your personal spiritual journey. What makes these revelations particularly valuable is their application across diverse life contexts, from personal challenges to relational dynamics to broader engagement with our complex world. Each insight offers practical wisdom that can transform how you experience circumstances that might otherwise remain confusing, painful, or seemingly meaningless. I encourage you to identify one specific revelation that particularly resonated with your current life situation. Rather than trying to apply everything at once, consider how this single insight might transform your approach to a current challenge or opportunity. Small, specific application often creates more meaningful change than general inspiration without focused implementation. As you continue beyond this message, remember that these insights become transformative, not through mere intellectual agreement, but through practical application in real-life circumstances. Whether you approach them through explicitly spiritual frameworks or as universal human wisdom, their potential to create meaningful change remains available to anyone willing to engage them with authentic openness and thoughtful application.